Hey dads, welcome back to the Fit Dad Club podcast. My name is Jason Barrett, and I just wanted to do a bit more of a tactical podcast for you all today. And I want to go through my thought processes, my way of finding and creating and cooking fat loss meals. Like essentially my methodology for you look at what's in the fridge, you're going for your shop. What are the steps? What do you look for? What do you try to do? When it comes to the practical side of actually building out meals, building out something that tastes good, how to cook it so it tastes good, and also have enough protein, enough fiber, enough veggies, and that kind of stuff. So I want to kind of walk you through that process. And, if you find this more sort of tactical, shorter podcast helpful, feel free to comment, feel free to, leave a review, let us know, send us a message on Instagram as well, because then we can do some more of these shorter ones too. But from a tactics perspective, when it comes to building out our meals, the first thing we do is as a family, we sit down, right? We've got me, my wife, and we've got a almost 3-year-old and an almost 1-year-old. So the 1-year-old kind of has his own meals because we're not putting, salt and sugar and that kind of stuff in them yet. And then the almost 3-year-old, she'll eat some of what we do, right? A little bit of what we do is determined around her, but we'll always have some sort of white and yellow foods like pasta and wraps in the cupboard ready to go for her, just in case she doesn't like what it is we're cooking, or noodles or whatever it is. Anything that's beige, right? As they are at this age. So we have a look at the week. Normally, I'll either go through my wife, and because I've been cooking for a while, we'll go, are there any foods that you're craving? Any of the meals that you really enjoy? There are some things like as we get into summer and warmer weather, she's not one for stews, she's not one for soups and any of that sort of more wintry food. So those kind of go out the window, and those obviously come back in when it comes to winter time. So depending on the seasons essentially, and also her cravings. And what we try to do is we try to do 2 meals at a time, so that number one, I get a break from cooking on the second night, but then also it usually makes enough so it does 2 dinners for us, and then also has usually 1 or 2 meals for leftovers potentially. And if you do that consistently enough, you can stock up 5-6 meals in the freezer that you can just kind of go to if shit hits the fan and you need something, you can grab it. So I'll often base my meals often around whatever carbs we have available, or if there's something that's just particularly I'm keen to try or keen to use. So a couple of weeks ago, I did a beef stew with polenta. Wouldn't do it again. Polenta takes friggin' ages, and the texture of it does not work very well. But it's about considering what have we got in the cupboard, and if not, I'll default to something Asian, right? So whether it's a stir fry with rice or a stir fry with noodles or something like that, those are pretty much the that's not all Asian cuisine, but that's the basic focus. It's going to be, a meat with veg stir fried in a wok over either noodles or rice. And that's going to be, seasoned with a soy sauce, oyster sauce, Shashing wine, all of the sort of Asian condiments, and then some sesame oil. And that's pretty much going to be the meal, right? And you can do that pretty simply. You can even just get some generic stir fry sauces and do that. That I find is a sort of a really easy way to do it. The frustrating thing with doing stir fries is if you want to do it properly without just boiling it all, you've got to cook all the ingredients individually. So you get a wok or a pan really hot, chuck in the broccoli, put it to the side, chuck in the carrot, put it to the side. When I'm choosing veg for these kind of dishes, it's like most of our dishes are pretty much like broccoli, carrot, capsicum, celery. And sort of a good base for some Italian stuff, a good base for a lot of Asian stuff. Sometimes we might get some bok choy, we might get some zucchini. Last week I did a beef stew with pumpkin. All of these different sort of variations, I just look at what's on special. I look at what's cheap. I try not to buy too much of stuff if it's expensive. Corn, green beans, I'll often put in if we're doing, something a little bit more, Western. I'll just do some green beans up either in the oven or over the pan with a little bit of, butter and salt and pepper and that kind of stuff. And that'll be, a side for a steak or for, some pan roasted chicken breast or something like that. So I'll often pick an Asian dish. I'll often then go for whether it's a pasta or something like that, or maybe one of the things I've liked as a bit of a base is chickpeas, but I often just start with what is the carb, right? Like what is the vehicle for what I'm going to be having? Or I look at the specials and I go, what's the protein that I feel like? So if we're doing Asian style, I'll often either go for beef strips, like the extra lean beef strips, or I'll go for boneless, skinless chicken thighs. The beef strips, I'll do a process called velveting, where you put a little bit of bicarb soda in with them, and then you mix it around, and then you rinse it off, and then that makes it like super, super tender for when you are, then frying it. And then you coat it in a little bit of soy sauce, a little bit of corn flour, mix it all together, and that ends up going really, really well. Or I'll do a bulk thing of chicken thighs, and I'll do this for any recipe that doesn't have a protein in it, that needs a protein in it, that hasn't got a source of protein, hasn't got like a meat. I'll get a bulk 1.2 to 1.5 kilos of chicken thighs, season them with salt, pepper, whatever rub, whatever marinade you like, a little bit of oil, mix all of that up, and then just oven roast it in the oven on max heat for like 30 to 40 minutes till you get those little bits of charring on it. Has never failed me, right? Just one of those really brain dead ways to get really tasty food. And chicken thighs are good. They're a little bit higher fat than chicken breast, but they're also super, super, super tasty. So you're not running the risk of having that dry, bland chicken breast that a lot of people worry about when you're on a diet. So I'll have that, and I'll chop that up and chuck that through whatever, whether it's a pasta dish, like a creamy pasta dish that doesn't typically have much protein, like a carbonara, or whether it's just some other dish. Like last week, I did a lot of things last week, a creamy chickpeas, which was like called Marry Me Chickpeas, just from one of those Woolworths ideas book. And that was the only part of the recipe. It was just chickpeas in a creamy sauce, I think with a couple of vegetables. I don't think they had any of that. So I was like, what can I add to this? I'm going to add some oven roasted chicken because that's just my default go-to if something doesn't have protein, right? I'll just get the chicken. Then I was like, what vegetables would go well with it? Well, it's got, whenever I think chickpeas, I always kind of think Moroccan style spices. So I'm going to go with some capsicum, some zucchini, and some red onion. I'm going to fry those off and add those in. And it's not stuff you know all the time, but it's stuff that eventually you just get to know, what would be a good veg that would go with this dish? And even if it doesn't go with it, most veg doesn't add that much flavor, so it's not really that big of an issue. You can just kind of add in whatever you want. And if you grate it, like if you did grated zucchini, grated carrot, you could add that through there as well. And, people wouldn't even notice, especially the kids. So I would think about your carb first, or if they're on special, think about your protein. Sometimes if a roast is on special, I'll do a roast, right? One of those blade roasts where it's got the fat cap on top. You can cut the fat cap off and it'll be quite a lean roast. And you can tell if it's going to be lean or fatty if you look at it by how much white you're seeing throughout the middle of the meat. If it's all on the top in one big sort of chunk, then that's good. You can, leave it on for the cook, and then you can cut it off when you're eating it, and you're going to have a much leaner roast. And, you do that with some roast potatoes, sometimes, garlic bread, so just roasted veggies, all of the vegetables that are good for roasting, think pumpkin, carrot, broccoli, cauliflower, that kind of stuff, makes for a really easy dinner. So that's kind of the way I think about it, is like, what carbs have we got? If we've got a pasta, I'm going to get some extra lean beef mince. And this is probably one of the best meals for fat loss, is going extra lean beef mince with a shit ton of carrot, celery, onion, right? Cook all of that down together, cook it on slow, put in some tinned tomatoes, and you've got essentially a bolognese that you leave it simmering on low for a couple of hours. It has a lot of flavor. Obviously season it, salt, pepper, Italian herbs, put all that kind of stuff in there, garlic. Put all of that in and then put that over. I found out of all of the pasta noodles, spaghetti does tend to, for me at least, to be one of the more filling, one of the more high volume. Even though, 500 grams of pasta is 500 grams of pasta, there are some pasta shells and like the rigatoni, like the circular ones, that just, they are very big individually and they don't add a lot of fullness. I find it makes your bowl look a little bit sort of sad, but I found that with spaghetti, right, it's got a lot of volume to it. You could probably get 5, 6, 7 meals out of that, because you don't actually need that much spaghetti to make it an enjoyable meal with the meat sauce that you've got. So using the extra lean beef mince, we would usually do that if we had the spaghetti left over, or if I was just given like extra lean beef mince as something to cook with. More often than not, it's going to be a bolognese. Otherwise, you're looking at things like just doing up some tacos, or just doing up some beef over rice. You might mash it up, break it up and season it with more Asian stuff. And again, put it over rice, put it over noodles. As you can see, it's pretty simple and straightforward. I try not to overcomplicate the meals that we make, because, when you're parenting, you've just not got a lot of bandwidth to always sit along and follow a recipe step by step and, whatever. Most of my recipes are going to include some form of onion and garlic, right? Just to kind of add the flavor. They're going to be seasoned with salt and pepper. If it's Asian style, it's going to be more soy sauce, oyster sauce, and the Chinese cooking wine. If it's, more Italian, it's going to have the Italian herbs and it's going to have the tomato base in it. If it's, more Middle Eastern, more Moroccan, you're going to have chickpeas with, again, sort of the herbs. And then you're looking at, turmeric and Moroccan spices and paprika and that kind of stuff. And maybe a bit of Greek yogurt. Like, those things tend to work well together. And eventually you kind of build up your base of and your repertoire of meals that you can easily go to. But I'm thinking, cool, rice base. What am I going to put with it? And just get good at making those kind of meal decisions. Or like, are we going to do a rice dish? We're going to do pasta dish, and then we might do homemade pizzas on store-bought flatbread, because you can go ham, you can go light cheese, like you can easily make those things, or you can do smash burgers with the peppercorn extra lean burgers, or you can even make your own with the extra lean beef mince. Like there's so much that you can do, and then you go down into the route of more one pot meals where you've got you're cooking the chicken and the rice and the veg all in the same pot in the oven, and then it all comes together. Like there's a couple of recipes like that on our YouTube channel. I think one of them was like cheesy chicken chorizo rice, and it's still one of my favorite meal preps that I've ever done. You get the pre-diced chicken breast, you get some chorizo, you sear it off, you sear off the chicken breast in there, you put in some veggies like some spring onion and stuff like that, and then you put in the rice, chicken stock, all of the meat, and then you let it cook. Then halfway through, you add some green beans, and then it all comes together as this really fluffy, delicious rice dish. And you can sort of grate over some cheese if you want as well. So those, once you get into them, those little one pot meals having in the back pocket are really, really valuable too. But again, it's just another variation of chicken and rice, right? Same thing if you're doing anything more sort of Mexican or South American. I'm looking at rice, you're looking at beans as well as another really great way to bulk up your meals. Things like a chili con carne. That is one of probably the more consistent staples that my wife really likes. A lot of this is based around what my wife likes. But, you've got rice, then you've got sort of beans, and again, extra lean beef mince is probably the other option I go to the most when it comes to, having extra lean beef mince. Do I go for a pasta? Do I go for more of a chili con carne and doing that over rice? Adding in lentils, adding in beans, adding in chickpeas, always a really good way to add a lot of volume as well as a little bit more fiber. But your big way of bulking these out is adding in, more chunky veg, right? And having a shit ton more of that in there, because it adds a lot more volume, a lot more size to your meals without really adding a lot of, a lot of calories. So my meal process when we sit down at the start of the week is like, when do I need to cook? When do I want to have an easier day and not have to cook? How many days? We're usually looking at like 6 or 7 days. And then, in the back pocket, we've got eggs on toast if shit hits the fan, or just whipping up a quick omelet. But fundamentally, you're not wanting to overcomplicate this process. You're wanting to keep it simple, and you're wanting to go, how many meals have we got this week? Let's plan out, just do this one for 2 nights, and let's do a rice dish, all right? And you get better at these things over time. Like the first thing is you've got to plan it. You've got to plan it. You've got to know what's available. You've got to know what you've got. You've got to go, what is the carb or what is the lean meat that we're doing here? If you've got a dish that doesn't have any protein, fucking oven roast some chicken thighs, and that's going to be your go-to, right? Or last week I had some chicken breast schnitzels, like the flat ones without any of the crumbing on them, right? Because if you're looking at getting crumbed chicken, like pre-crumbed chicken that you're getting from the store that you're baking in the oven, it's often going to be already sort of deep fried, already crumbed in a way where it's adding a shit ton more calories. This process took me, maybe 5 minutes longer, and I got the extra lean, like just straight up chicken breast schnitzels, salt and pepper, dusted them in flour on both sides. Yes, adds a little bit of calories when you fry it, but it's not that much. The flour had some paprika and some garlic powder in it, and it tasted like, honestly, like KFC original recipe after it came out of the pan. And I found, I just Googled a recipe for it. Recipe Tin Eats came up, and there was like a creamy mushroom sauce that went with it. So we just did that over a small serve of pasta, and it was great. I didn't even add any extra veggies for that one, but you definitely can. And we used that for then sandwiches or rolls or something. That I bought some Turkish rolls, and then we just had like, these chicken schnitzel sandwiches for dinner, right? And we had that with a little bit of veg and just like some salad in there, and that was it, right? And so never underestimate the power of just having some rolls and some Turkish bread in the back pocket, so you can just whip that out. Have like if you've got leftover steak, have a steak sandwich. You did roast and potatoes. Next night we'll do a roast beef roll, right? And that can be dinner. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, but it is very much focused on one source of carbs, one source of fat, one source of protein, and just making sure that you've got enough protein in there to stick it out. Because for us, I will often buy about 1 kilo of protein for 2 nights. So that means my wife and I each get probably about 200 grams of meat, which is about 40 grams of protein in the meal. And then there's like 1 meal left over. So you could potentially go bigger the next day. But it does require planning. It requires looking ahead. It requires going, well, what have we got? What do we want to use up in the cupboard? And then finding something that you can use with that, and then flavoring it appropriately. Right? Again, Asian style, the trio that I talked about, soy sauce, oyster sauce, and the cooking wine, as well as a little bit of sesame oil. That is a great foundation for pretty much any Asian style dish that you're looking to do. if you just want that kind of flavor over a stir fry or rice or noodles. And it doesn't add a hell of a lot of calories except for the sesame oil, but you just be a bit, you don't be too generous with it. And then you've got, more of the sort of European Italian style, more tomato based stuff. Then I try to stay away from more creamy things if I'm on a deficit, because obviously cream is fat. Fat adds a lot more calories than protein and carbs do. So I tend to try and stray away from having too much of that. But you can, if that is your source of fat, you can have definitely like a creamier sauce. You've just got to bump it up with enough protein. The problem is when people go, oh, I'm going to have a sauce which is cream and cheese and bacon and oil. And it's just like, well, then you're just adding fat on fat on fat on fat. And that's compounding the issue. So try and keep the meals as simple as you can. Try and focus on, all right, what are we getting this week? What have we got to use up? And then adding in, if it hasn't got veg, adding in 1 or 2 veg. If it hasn't got protein, adding in, be a basic bitch like me and just go chicken thighs in the oven, max heat, seasoned well, right? This is one thing that people sort of don't do enough. Salt, pepper, and then whatever sort of rub to actually make it look a different color, and you'll generally be in a good zone, right? Max heat for 30, 40 minutes till it starts to get charred, and that's the best zone. Cooking and creating meals and just sort of figuring out what to have. I mean, for me, it starts with figuring out what meals do you enjoy, what meals do your family like, and then just remembering them and writing them down and going, all right, well, these are the list of meals. What are people feeling like this week? And continuing to go from there. Like it's not a huge ask, but it's something that does take a lot of time. And look, even I struggle with it from time to time, but if you have a lot of meals in your back pocket that you can continually go back to, it makes your life a lot easier. So feel free to let us know, if you enjoyed this sort of podcast, if you got any value out of it, if you had any questions about doing meals and structuring your meals and doing that kind of stuff, feel free to let me know. And this was mainly focused on dinner because we like to kind of keep breakfast and lunch pretty consistent. Otherwise, you tend to blow out, but dinner is the big one for a lot of people. So yeah, hit us up on Instagram, let us know what your thoughts are. And until next time, I'll see you next week.